Fascinating insight into our dreams. I'm just going to launch straight into the questions because we've already got a load of really, really interesting questions that I want to know the answer to. So I'm going to dive straight in. It might all be in a little bit of random order, but I'll try and make some sense of it. So one of the things that came up early in the chat, there was a question from A. Dixon and a question from Gabriel, or maybe it's Gabrielle, who knows? And both of them were talking about controlling your dreams. So Gabriel mentions lucid dreaming and how does that relate to our usual passiveness while we dream? And A. Dixon says, yeah, someone had a book about learning to control your dreams and that somehow helped your waking life. And I guess the question is there any evidence for lucid dreaming or and also A. Dixon goes on to ask, can we control like the whole sleep cycle of our dream, or would it just be the bit just before we wake up where we're sort of awake and whatever? And I just wondered your views on that.
So lucid dreaming, in fact, most of us have had the occasional lucid dream. Just in case anybody in the audience doesn't know what that means, it's when you're dreaming and you know that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. And some lucid dreamers are able to influence the content of their dreams. They can actually change the outcome because they realize this is a dream, you know, so I can make anything happen in my dream that I like because it's not real. Most of us have had especially as children, we have the occasional lucid dream. But some people, most of their dreams are lucid, or a good many of their dreams are lucid. In fact, nobody has total lucidity in their dreams. And it is actually a skill that you can develop. You can learn how to enhance your likelihood of having lucid dreams. But the question is, what is the difference in the brain of a lucid dreamer from the brain of somebody like me who has very few lucid dreams? And the answer is, remember I said the prefrontal convexity, the part of the brain which is really, it's not an oversimplification to say it's the sort of executive head office of the brain. It's where the orders come from. It's who's in charge. It's where the plans and strategies are devised and monitored, executed. This part of the brain, as I showed you on the positron emission tomography and my lesion studies, appears to be switched off during dreams. And the reason I predicted that is precisely because we're not lucid, we're not in charge, that dreams just sort of shoot through us. And that's the difference. In lucid dreaming, prefrontal cortex is not deactivated like it is in regular dreaming. So that's a neat, it's what you would, it's nice when what you expect to happen is what happens. And that's evidently the explanation. Incidentally, you said also in passing, Chris, does it really happen? I mean, sorry, Martin, does it really? I mean, is lucid dreaming a real thing? And in fact, there are some lucid dreamers who are able to communicate with the experimenter. We teach them to indicate with their fingers when they're dreaming, and we can physiologically tell, that they are in dreaming sleep. And so, yeah, it's a thing. It's a phenomenon. It happens. There are such things as lucid dreams. And I said at the beginning that dreams are sort of excruciatingly subjective things. And it opens a narrow little window into being able to get objective data while you're busy dreaming from the dreamer, at least when it comes to lucid dreams.
And I guess just as a follow-up, that it's something that's sort of physiological. So my guess would be if you could lucid dream, you'd have taught yourself how to, but it isn't possible, I guess.
It's not no, there are methods whereby you can increase your ability to be lucid during dreams. I mean, there's some people who are gifted in this respect and who just do it automatically. And most of us, as I said, have very occasional lucid dreams, usually as children. But there are ways in which you can increase your lucidity. Doesn't mean that you'll suddenly become a gifted lucid dreamer.
And do they sleep better or worse, lucid dreamers? So presumably worse if they're very active, or does it not make a difference?
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I'm sure somebody studied that, but I'm not aware of any empirical data on the quality of sleep in lucid dreamers.
While we're on kind of the content of dreams, Giovanna asks an interesting question, which is that are nightmares related to this same function She says, I read somewhere that traumatic nightmares are not related to REM sleep, maybe with deep sleep. And is that true? And if so, how could we avoid traumatic nightmares, which can be incredibly physical and incredibly upsetting?
Yes. So, I'm not sure if Giovanna's asking about post-traumatic nightmares or nightmares in general, because it is one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that the patients re-experience the traumatic event in their dreams. So they relive the trauma in their dreams. Or whether she's asking about nightmares in general, because of course, many people have nightmares not on a post-traumatic basis, they just have nightmares. So I'll say a few things covering both of those possibilities. First of all, I mentioned in my talk that if you increase dopamine, in other words, if you increase the brain chemical that drives the dream process, if you increase it too much, it causes nightmares. I said it causes more frequent dreams, longer dreams, more emotionally intense dreams, more bizarre dreams, and more nightmares. I don't think I mentioned in my talk that that's a drug that we give patients with Parkinson's disease. That Parkinson's disease entails a depletion of dopamine. And so the various treatments for Parkinson's disease all basically involve boosting dopamine. And if you give too much dopamine, in fact, if you give too much dopamine, you drive the patient into a psychosis. But if you give just a little bit too much dopamine, then it causes nightmares. So the first indication that there's too much of this dream generating stuff in the system, too much dreamness or drive, too much of the drive that lies behind the dream leads to nightmares, which suggests it's a kind of excess. There's a too muchness about nightmares. The similar observation is in patients with temporal lobe seizures. So if you have, seizures are, you mentioned REM sleep versus non-REM sleep. It's not true that nightmares happen in non-REM sleep. It's night terrors, which don't contain dreams. They're just behaviors, and they're particularly common in children, and that's a different phenomenon. But during non-REM sleep, when our brains are in the slow rhythmical, it's called slow wave sleep, patients who have seizures, they're particularly prone to seizures during non-REM sleep. Because of that, it's the same as watching a computer screen or a television screen or a strobe light. It sets off seizures. And temporal lobe seizures, which is where you see the activation of the brain in post-traumatic stress symptomatology. So when the patients are actively having that re-experiencing of the trauma, you see massive activation of the mesial temporal lobes. And in seizures in that same area, if you wake patients up, because these are partial, it doesn't generalize to the whole brain. So you just have seizure activity in that part of the brain. If you wake those patients up, when you see the seizure activity on the EEG, they report a nightmare. So what they were experiencing was a nightmare. So again, it seems like pathological excesses of activation, like I said, with the dopamine boosting drugs, likewise with the seizure activity, too much activation, pathological activation results in nightmares. And in fact, epileptic patients generally have more nightmares than non-epileptic people. And many of them have recurring nightmares, the same nightmare over and over again, like we see in PTSD patients. So what all of those findings, which I've just skimmed over there, what they all point to is something of a failure of the dream process. In other words, if the function of dreams, whatever else their function is, if a function of dreams is to keep us asleep, in the face of this activation, remember, it's the arousal of this dopamine systems, this emotional arousal that triggers the dream process. If the dream is meant to contain this arousal and deflect it in this hallucinatory fashion, then if there's too much of it, the dream fails. So nightmares lead to anxiety dreams. It's like, oh my God, it's all going wrong. And then you wake up. It's definitional of nightmares that you wake up. So a neat sort of summary explanation of all of that is nightmares are failed dreams.
Wow. Building on what you were saying about the dopaminergic activation of dreams, Ash wanted to add that Freud said that we all tend to be psychotic in our dreams. And of course, dopamine also plays a key role in psychosis. Can you elaborate on dreams keeping psychosis at bay? Is that a true thing to say?
Well, I agree with the first part of what Ash said, that dreams are a form of psychosis. I wouldn't say that dreams keep psychosis at bay, but dreams are. I mean, I wouldn't say that they don't. I don't see any reason why one would claim that. I'm not aware of any evidence for that. But dreams are, patently a psychotic state, and this was one of the reasons why. Not only Freud, but before him, John Hewlings Jackson, who was the preeminent British neurologist of the 19th century, he pointed that out. Jackson said, if you can understand dreams, you'll understand psychosis, because they are a kind of normal model for psychosis. As I've said repeatedly this evening, we hallucinate and are deluded in our dreams. And there was this interesting observation in the leucotomy patients that the ones who could still dream could still generate psychotic symptoms. The ones who couldn't. And please note that what was lost with those patients with the leucotomy was also their motivational drive. So this whole, this is the important part about are dreams meaningless and all of that. It's clear that the part of the brain that generates wishes and wants and desires. I mean, there really is no part of the mammal brain that's more, wishy, wanty, desire-y than the mesocortical, mesolimbic dopamine system. This clearly does drive dreams. But to come back to Ash's question, so when we look at the dreaming brain, that there's this excess of dopamine activity, and as he or she's saying, I don't know, Ash is also this kind of
gender-neutral name.
Yes, but it's true, implicit in the question, that psychotic states have everything to do with excessive dopamine, and you can generate psychosis in you and me. I mean, you just take enough dopamine, you're going to go psychotic, and the standard ingredient in just about every antipsychotic drug is that you blocking activity in that system. So blocking dopamine does block psychotic symptoms. But the interesting thing is what I showed you in terms of the dreaming brain, that you see this excessive activity in that dopamine circuit, and you see reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, which normally regulates our primitive emotions and motivations, and the regression onto the perceptual systems where the hallucination proper happens. That's exactly what the brain looks like when it is experiencing a psychotic hallucination. David Silberzweig did the heroic study of, I mean, imagine doing this. He got paranoid schizophrenics to go into fMRI scanners. While they were having paranoid hallucinations, he imaged what was going on in their brains. I mean, it's really very noble of these patients, schizophrenics, to go to take part in this experiment. And what Silberzweig showed is there's reduced activation compared to normal controls in the prefrontal cortex, that there's increased activation compared to normal controls in the dopamine circuits, and there is activation of the perceptual cortex. The only difference is that in the dreamers, it's more the visuospatial cortex. In the schizophrenics, it's in the language cortex, in and around Wernicke's area. So the dreaming brain and the psychotic brain really do look very similar. And so although it's an ancient idea, as I said, John Hewlings Jackson came up with it in the first place. And why the early psychiatrists like Freud were interested in dreams was precisely because they thought they might give us some understanding of mental illness. even though these are quaint old ideas, I think there's a lot of merit in the idea that to the extent that we can understand the dreaming brain, we will gain new insights into psychotic illness.
Really interesting. And you mentioned language there. Eliza had a few questions about the content of dreams. So for example, if you're bilingual, can you tell what language you're dreaming in? Do some people dream in black and white? And just on top of that, like, for example, people that have been deaf since birth, presumably they only dream in visions, and people that have been blind since birth only dream audio dreams. Is this right? I mean, how does the brain, your brain and your life experience and your sense experience affect, the content of your dreams in that way?
Yeah. Well, there are many interesting observations that we've gathered over the years about these sorts of things. I'll just mention some of them quickly. Firstly, yes, congenitally blind patients have non-visual dreams. In other words, they have fully hallucinatory experiences, but the content of those experiences are the same as the contents of their waking ones. In other words, they're non-visual. But that's only in congenitally blind people. If you have an acquired blindness, in other words, if the cortex has had any visual experience, it's able to generate dreams. So even though those patients have no visual experience during waking life, they do have visual experiences during dreams, which is really quite moving, because the only time you see something, is in your dreams. And we have the same phenomenon in hemiplegic patients and in aphasic patients. I'll explain what those terms mean. Patients who are paralyzed down the one or the other side of the body in their waking movements. In their dreams, they move normally. So just as with congenitally blind people, with these patients, it really is, it's a kind of a liberation fleetingly. In their dreams, they're able to move normally. Paraplegics likewise, but that's less surprising because those are spinal lesions. But patients with damage to the motor cortex who paralyzed in consequence, in dreams then, so this, by the way, points to some problems again with Hobson's activation synthesis theory, because on his theory, what's being activated is the whole cortex. And you have motor neurons and visual neurons and auditory neurons, randomly lighting up. And so you have all these different kinds of experience. But that isn't actually what we find. Those were some of the things I predicted. I said I just glossed over which of my predictions were not confirmed. All of those were not confirmed. Hemiplegic patients are not hemiplegic in their dreams. Aphasic patients can speak in their dreams. And again, they have they convey they really look forward to their dreams. So what this shows is that there's something rather more complex mental process going on than just joining the dots. It's relying on deeper, longer-term autobiographical memory systems. Like in acquired blindness, if you have only 5 years of sight and then go blind, those 5 years give rise to memory traces, which then are utilized in the dream process. It's not just a sort of joining of the dots of what's going on in the cortex. So there's much else that I could say of the phenomena of that kind, but that's a sort of a smattering of things that we've learned along those lines.
Fascinating. So I've just switched windows and scrolled down. There's been like another 20 really good and interesting questions. So I'm really sorry, I'm not going to be able to get through to everyone's questions, but I'll try and cover the sort of main areas. One of the things that's come up from a few different people is the idea of sleep quality. So, people saying, am I able to reduce my sleep time healthily? Or does the research have any implications for things we could do to improve the results of our dreaming and get better sleep as a result? And Alex says, my smartwatch has an option to wake me up at a certain time according to some kind of sleep cycle, so you don't wake up groggy. Is this a thing? I think it's a heart rate monitor that it uses. Somebody else mentioned a thing called Hoop Strap, which also uses that. So I just wondered, does any of your research sort of inform us about how we can improve the quality of our sleep?
So there are actually a range of issues that have been touched on there. That's not one question. It's a whole sort of like...
it's a whole other talk.
It's a sweep of various different things. So I'll just pick up sort of semi at random some elements. These smart watches and other easy to use ways of monitoring your sleep are really pretty unreliable. When we compare the findings on those devices with proper polysomnographs with patients properly in a sleep laboratory, the correlation is rather poor. So it's not zero, but you mustn't rely too much on what your watch says was going on in your sleep. How about improving the quality of our sleep? Well, I won't go into that because sleep hygiene. You can just Google it. There's all sorts of very sensible, straightforward things. Most patients with sleep disorders are helped just by improving their sleep hygiene. Things like the temperature in the room and light and ambient sound and the fresh air and in terms of what you do before you go to sleep, not having devices in the room, etc., etc. It's amazing how much you can improve sleep just by doing these very commonsensical things. So I won't trawl through all of that. It's just Google sleep hygiene and you'll find plenty of. In fact, there's that wonderful book by Walker called "Why Do We Sleep," which was so popular a couple of years ago, and that goes into all of that in great detail. But I will just say this, linking back to the main theme of my presentation, which is that anything which causes you to have more dreams, like REM sleep. REM sleep is arousal. It's an arousal state, and dreams are an attempt to deal with that arousal state. We also have, which again shows that the old REM theory was wrong. As we're falling asleep, it's called descending stage 2, 90 minutes before the first REM period. If you wake people up, then over 50% of the time they report dreams. And I'm sure most of the audience will know this from their own experience. As you drop off, you dream. Sometimes, you wake up at the start realizing, shit, I must have fallen asleep because I was dreaming. And likewise, in the late morning, as you're heading toward waking up, outside of REM sleep, it's called the late morning effect. You have lots of dreams. And that's, by the way, during COVID, during the pandemic, where people are not waken up by alarm clocks rushing off to work, wake up, more naturally. We think that we are having much more vivid dreams. It's the late morning effect. It's because so what all of those things have in common. REM sleep is arousal. When you're falling asleep, you're not yet asleep, you're still relatively aroused. And as you wake up as you head towards waking up in the morning, the rising morning phase of the diurnal rhythm, it's called, then you have more dreams. So anything that arouses you is going to cause you to dream more. So the link between dreaming and quality of sleep basically comes down to sleep disturbance, and therefore back to sleep hygiene. The simple things that enable you to sleep better will also make you dream less.
So we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to try and cram in 2 more questions. One comes from Matt Benton, and actually I was thinking this the same way. So I'd sort of, in the past, when I listened to talks about this or watched documentaries or whatever, thought about the theory of dreams for learning. That I was sort of had in my mind that the theory was that we get all these random memories that are our brains trying to make sense of what happened in the day, and dreams are really important for us to be able to memorize things. So is that partly true as well, or is that not really accepted?
No, that's very solid. So we've known for a good 2-3 decades that sleep is very important for memory consolidation. Sleep deprivation is the worst thing you can do for laying down new memories. And we've also known for some time that the different stages of sleep, REM sleep and non-REM sleep, seem to have differential functions. They're both important for memory consolidation, but for different aspects of memory consolidation. And REM sleep seems to be particularly important for consolidating emotional memories. So things that you've learned during the day, they consolidated during the night while you're asleep. Consolidation basically entails, what am I going to keep and what am I going to throw away? What's important here? What's going to be discarded and what's going to be consolidated into long-term memory. It's obvious why this should happen during sleep. because you don't have to deal with clear and present dangers. You can do this housekeeping when you're offline. So there's oodles of evidence that sleep and the different stages of sleep are important for memory consolidation, in other words, for new learning. However, before the research that I've summarized in my presentation this evening, when we thought REM sleep and dreaming were the same thing, the way that we operationalized dreaming was to manipulate REM sleep. So if you increase or decrease the amount of REM, which you can do chemically, or if you deprive somebody of REM, we thought that by doing this, we were seeing what the effects of dreams are. And of course, that's not correct. So we conflated dreams with REM sleep, interpreted our findings about REM sleep and memory as having implications for the function of dreams and memory. And that's a mistake. So we're having to play catch up now. And fortunately, the paradigm that I reported in that last study that we're doing at the Charité in Berlin, we have patients who cannot dream. And so we now have a much more rigorous method of testing theories about what exactly the dream is doing in relation to memory consolidation, as opposed to what REM sleep is doing. The findings are very interesting. I'm sorry, I know you want to squeeze in one more question, but I'd say this.
No, it's fascinating.
There's lots of evidence that dream. Remember, I kept saying, whatever else dreams do, they protect sleep. That doesn't mean it's the only thing they do. There's good evidence, growing evidence, for what I've just said, that new learning, that memory consolidation of a particular kind, that dreaming is important for that. But also that dreams are important for emotion regulation. You can predict who's going to get depressed from whether or not over the night, your dreams, if you study it empirically, the emotional tone of the early evening dreams is much more negative than the late morning dreams. So over the night, the emotional tone of dreams improves. If it does not, that predicts depression. So it seems as if dreams also play an important role in emotion regulation. So how do we regulate our emotions? I mean, what emotions are, how do we solve problems? If you haven't solved the problem, you've got negative affects. If you have, it feels good. So this whole business of learning and emotion regulation seem basically to be the same thing, that the mastering of problems during sleep, there's mental work that's going on in dreaming sleep. You know, there's good evidence for all of that. So I just wanted to squeeze that in case anybody thought that that all that dreams are about is protecting sleep. They seem to have these important memory consolidation and emotion regulation functions, which seem at bottom to be one and the same thing. I hope I made that point clearly.
No, that was very well made, and I really appreciate you sort of clarifying that. That was excellent. I think we're probably out of time, I'm afraid, everyone. But thank you so much for all of your amazing questions. If you'd like to find out more, Mark has a number of books out. The most recent was The Hidden Spring, which he gave a talk about as part of our program a few months ago, which I think is already on our YouTube channel. So do check that out if you can. Just before I disappear, finally, just a few more things to say. If you've enjoyed tonight's event and you want to support the Royal Institution a bit more, please do join as a member or patron, or send us a donation if you haven't already donated something for your ticket. It's massively appreciated by everyone that works at the RI. Please also, if you've got a few moments, fill in our survey. We do read them all, and we try and take everything on board. As I mentioned right at the top of the shop, don't forget on Thursday we'll be probing into the mysteries of matter at the LHC and investigating what's going on with muons and why they're heavier than we expect or something. I'm not a particle physicist, so come to that talk to find out from an actual expert. Just before we go, Mark, is there anything else you'd like to say, anywhere people can find you on the internet, or anything else you'd like to plug?
Well, I'm on Twitter for my sins, Mark_Solms, and I'm so glad you mentioned my book. Do please read my book, The Hidden, about brain mechanisms of consciousness.
Fantastic. Well, with that recommendation ringing in your ears, it just remains for me to say thank you again for all your fantastic questions. Thank you so much to Mark for an absolutely fascinating talk, and I'll see you again soon. Take care and good night.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everyone. Good night.